I would just like visit San Francisco and visit all these guys, including Kyle Vogt, who you mentioned, who started Justin TV. So that was the context where I knew him, and I had met him at MIT because he was a few years behind me, and we met each other at the Entrepreneurs Club. And I would just go to San Francisco and kind of try to shake the trees for potential co-founders, basically be like, all right, do you know anyone good? Do you know anyone good? And then Kyle mentioned that he had a floor mate from his dorm named Arash, who also did like programming competitions at MIT and might be someone for me to talk to. And so Kyle introduced us. I went down to the student center at MIT because Arash was still in college. Like he was maybe a junior or senior. And I started chipping away at him to see if he'd be willing to, you would have to drop out of school to do this. So I was, we met on like a Monday or something, and I'm expecting, for this to be a process and like to have to like call his parents to convince them I'm not some weirdo and things like that. But to Arash's kind of enormous credit, or maybe our collective folly, like he just dropped out of school a couple of days later to do this, and we threw in together and went to go interview at YC. And the other thing we did that helped get us into YC was I made this like demo video and put it on Hacker News. And so that also played a role here, because that was actually that video, again, like through that college admissions kind of thinking. And I'd read a book called Guerrilla Marketing, like how do you attract attention to your product or service if you have no money? So these kinds of tactics were like an example of what the book talked about. And so I made this like demo video of Dropbox. I figured like, well, what does Paul likely do most days? Like probably what the rest of us do, like hit refresh on Hacker News. So I'm like, all right, if I can get in front of them there, maybe that'll be good. And then maybe that'll also help with this like co-founder search. And sure enough, I made this like 3-minute video. It's still out there. And it hit the top of Hacker News for like 2 days.
Oh, wow.
It got some like colorful, comments and skepticism. And so, but like mostly it just put us on the map, and it like got Paul's attention. Actually, Arash had seen the video before Kyle introduced us. So that ended up being like the most pivotal thing to get Dropbox to transition from kind of just being this concept to starting to take on a life of its own.
I love it. And I remember the interview. I remember we were all like, oh yeah, definitely. So we said yes. Now, I was listening earlier to this interview I did with you. What were you going to say?
Well, there's one more thing. So after we got the call saying...
This is what I was going to ask you about. This is what I'm going to ask you about. Tell the story.
So like happily, we do the interview. We get a phone call from Paul saying, hey, we'd like to fund you. We're like, this is great. So that's moving forward. And then we go back to our Zipcar, and then we discover that the car had been broken into and our laptops were stolen. But it was okay because like literally all of our stuff was on Dropbox, so we didn't actually lose any data.
Oh, that's a great story.
That is insane. And I had forgotten that story, Carolyn. And earlier today, I revisited this total cringeworthy video interview that I did with Drew in 2010. I was so bad I couldn't even listen to myself. But he told that story and I almost fell out of my chair. I did not remember that story. I bet you were in a pretty good mood though, Drew. I bet you were pretty high after that call. So I'm really interested to reminisce a little bit about fundraising, because you had some interesting stories happen. Now, you were in the Summer '07 group in Cambridge, because it was in the summer when we still did both coasts. And your pitch was very interesting because you actually deleted the PowerPoint mid-pitch in front of the audience to sort of showcase how the product worked. Were you nervous about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we're always the same thing. We're just like thinking, how do we differentiate ourselves? But one of the gimmicks or hooks we put in the demo was, close the presentation, delete it, and then Dropbox lets you like undo or have version history for everything, so you could bring back the file. I think that period was just so like sleepless and crazy that I don't think we even thought about like, oh, what if this doesn't work? We're like, this has to work. Everything is like duct taped together. Like there's only one way through this. But yeah, it worked great. And I think it was like something that stuck with a lot of the investors.
You once described that fundraising time as a crazy fever dream. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it was wild. In Boston, we did all the same demo and everything, but mostly the investors just pointed out potential problems. They're like, well, this is not a great, this is kind of a graveyard. A lot of startups have failed at this. Google, Microsoft are going to kill you. Which, by the way, it's not even wrong. I'm like, that's probably what will happen. But we go to California and we go to Mountain View and do the whole delete the pitch and restore it and finish our demo. And we were like the last company before a break. And then this investor comes like sprinting up the aisle. And I'm thinking he's like wants to talk to me, but he like blazes by me and starts speaking to Arash in Farsi because they're both Persian. So his name's Pejman. And, this was just like yet another ridiculous thing. So so he's like, you guys, I'd love to talk to you about angel investing. And, we didn't really know who he was. I didn't recognize his firm. And so I was sort of like, who is this guy? But he's very persistent and kind. So he's like, yeah. And we're like, sure, we'll come visit you in Palo Alto. And then the day comes and we like rent a zip car and we go down to University Ave. And I'm like, oh man, we're running late. There's no parking spot. Okay, we find one. And then I look up and I'm like, Medallion Rug Gallery. I'm like, I'm like checking the email on my phone. I'm like, now I'm late and I'm lost. And so we like open the door, but I'm like, it is the same street number. So, okay, like, let's see what happens. And I open the door and I'm like, I'm so sorry to bother you, the receptionist, but like, is Pejman here? And she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And of course you look around, it's like rugs and people looking at rugs.
I know Medallion Rug Gallery. That's why I'm laughing extra hard.
So then, but it turns out, of course, Palo Alto, like the rug gallery has like a secret back exit into a boardroom that's set up for startup pitches. And so we like talked to him about Dropbox and Pejman, it's really sweet. He's like made an introduction to Sequoia. And we were like, we're not ready for this. Like that should come later. But he was again very persistent and kind. And so next thing we knew, we're at Sequoia's offices on a Friday. Pejman came with us, and so he was like sort of sitting with us in the pitch, which is I learned later quite unorthodox. I think I get a urgent phone call that night from our partner there, saying like, "Hey, Mike Moritz wants to meet you. We'd like you to just meet the partnership, but Mike's not going to be there. He can only meet on tomorrow morning." So I'm like, okay, yes. And then we're like, oh, where do you want to meet? Where I'm like, well, there's a lot of great like coffee shops in North Beach, or you can come to Dropbox World HQ, sort of as a joke. And he's like, oh, great. Yeah. What's the address? We'll be there. And, I'm looking around our apartment. It's like corporate housing. It's like we're moving back. We haven't even like unpacked our stuff because we'd only been moved to California a few days before. So we're like cleaning up. And I remember the morning of, I'm like, oh shit, we don't have any like drinks or anything. So I'd like run down to the Columbus Cafe, buy a bunch of Odwalas. And we pitched Mike in our living room. And another one of our gimmicks was like, we would take photos during on our phones, and then the photos would save to Dropbox. And so we have this great photo of like Mike and Pejman just sitting on our couch, where we would play like Xbox and Rock Band later. And so Saturday we talked to Mike. Had a pretty good poker face, just, asked a little bit about competition, but otherwise didn't say much. Pitched the partnership at Sequoia on the Monday, and that night had a handshake deal for $1 million seed round. So like one business day turnaround, which was nuts. And then a week later, or, a couple days later, the kinds of things you have to deal with here are like, they're like, okay, great, congrats, this is awesome, send us your wiring instructions. And we're like, what?